Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm John Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vitor.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
We are recording this in Des Moines, just hours away from the very first primary contest of the 2020 election, the Iowa caucuses. We've all been driving around the state for the last couple days, trying to hit up as many candidate events as we can and talk to some caucus goers and volunteers. So we were all excited to talk about the final Des Moines Register poll today, but it's been canceled. Just like so many other things.
Cancel culture comes for the Des Moines Register.
Cancel culture came for the Des Moines Register after one of the Iowans who was polled said that Mayor Pete Buttigieg was missing from the list of candidates to choose from. That person happened to be a supporter of Pete's. They called the campaign called the Register investigated, and they decided not to release the poll out of an abundance of caution. Apparently, one of the call operators had enlarged the font size of the list, which cut Pete's name off. But since the list of candidates is constantly randomized every time they call a new supporter, this also could have happened to other candidates. We don't know. But to be safe, they just decided to nix the whole poll. So the polar coaster has malfunctioned. What do you guys think?
I love it.
It feels like one of those new roller coasters where you like flip upside down at some point during a twist and we're just hanging there.
Or we fell out. We don't know.
Yeah. I mean, listen, in some ways, look, I feel really badly for the Des Moines Register. They probably put a lot of money, a lot of time and resources into this poll. They've done heroic work covering like 4,000 campaigns with not a very big staff. So this sucks for them. It sucks for Ann Seltzer, who's meticulous and a great pollster. And, you know, I think it probably speaks to her character and the way she treats her job, that she would scrap a poll that probably cost $100,000. That said, maybe it's good that you won't have a bunch of Iowa Democrats like wanting to pick a winner in the very end and going with who they think has momentum in that moment. Now, if you're like an Amy Klobuchar, right, and you're banking on a last-minute surge, or you're Bernie Sanders and you want to, just put away the field in this poll would have helped you shown that sucks. But I don't know. Like, we all voted without polls before. It's okay. Everyone's gonna be fine.
Survived. Yeah.
I love it. I think it's like fundamentally like, there's been this, especially when electability is on everyone's mind, especially when there are so many candidates and nobody really feels like they know what's going to happen. Tommy, in your Iowa series, you talked to Adisu about this, about like, if the purpose of Iowa is to be a place where you can do grassroots politics, if that's the value of it, and then not doing well in polls, making it harder for you to do well in polls in the future is a dangerous disruption of that process of just letting people decide without the weight of other people's decisions in their minds. So I think it's great.
Would this be a good time to talk about the results of our Iowa poll from 3 days ago?
There's a new CBS tracker out this morning in Iowa that shows it a little closer.
Or why don't we just say what we thought it was going to be, and just say what we hope.
Yeah,
the
like, you know what?
were.
Instead of data, let's just go with feelings. Yeah. What good does that do?
No, it's going to be great.
Okay,
we're going to go with feelings.
I have counted the yard signs I've seen.
Polls don't care about your feelings. So anyway, no, it's everyone is very excited about it in our world of people who talk about this for a living. But I agree with you guys. I think in the end, like, if we're down one poll, especially a poll that had such outsized importance, right? This wasn't just any poll, and we've had a lot of polls of Iowa over the last couple of weeks, and a good majority of them have Bernie Sanders in the lead. A few others maybe show Biden a little bit stronger. Yeah, it's still unclear, but it's almost perfect that in a race this unpredictable, that the one thing that was supposed to help predict it more than anything is now not with us.
The last remaining political institution that everyone had faith in, the Register poll, has collapsed.
Maybe the military can start doing polls.
I mean, it does sort of raise this like kind of hard to think about question: is this probably happens all the time?
Right.
It's just this time it happened to happen to a supporter who was well wired enough in the Buttigieg campaign to call and speak to someone about it. And so maybe all polls are wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, great, Dan. Thanks for that.
Not our poll, because it's online, so that can't happen.
So, all right, so instead of going into their polls, we're just going to do traditional punditry based on, again, our feelings, but not just our feelings, our experiences, because we have been here.
For 3 days.
For 3 days we've been here. So we are experts. Ask us anything.
Yes. I was thinking just...
Hey, at least Tommy's been here.
Yeah, Tommy's been here a lot in the whole series.
Tommy's been here a lot.
The rest of us are the people we have always hated. We have parachuted into Des Moines We've mostly talked to people who also parachuted into Des Moines, and here are our thoughts on the race.
And when we try to get places in Des Moines, we just follow Tommy.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I've been producing you guys.
Okay, so far, our team has been able to check out events with Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Joe Biden, and Andrew Yang. So let's go through one by one and talk about how we think these campaigns are doing. And let's start with the Andrew Yang event that we went to last night here in Des Moines. Start with Andrew Yang because, as the Yang Gang reminds us, sometimes we forget to talk about him so much. So last night in Des Moines, we went to this event at the Marriott. We talked to some people at the event, and we'll let you guys hear that now, and then we'll talk about our own reactions.
We are at the final Yang rally in Iowa, and it is going to be epic because Andrew Yang is going to be here. Yang Gang. He's the only person talking about automation now. It's going to take a big amount of our workforce that doesn't go to college. And that's going to really suck. No one's really talking about that.
I think what interested me was how he was really looking to the future and trying to identify the root cause of America's problems. 4 years ago, I was in the primary as a Republican, but I switched over this year because I really think Andrew's the best of any party right now.
I'm wearing a Yang t-shirt. I'm wearing Levi jeans. I'm wearing a math hat. My wife and I are both precinct captains, so this is a special math cap. About 18 months ago, I read an article in the New York Times about Andrew Yang had started his campaign, and he was very much into the understanding the impact of automation and artificial intelligence. I've been talking with my wife on that and the impact on society, meaning people lose their jobs. We won't have many jobs out there. We have to do something to take care of our people and change our definition of work and what gives people a feeling of self-worth. So people aren't just either getting violent or taking drugs or whatever. Andrew talks about that all the time, how our GDP and our economy is supposedly doing so well, but our life expectancy is going down the last 3 years. What's wrong with this picture? So we are not thriving, even if the GDP is doing well.
I've never been a Democrat, nor have I really ever been a Republican, but I'm traditionally a little more right-leaning. I'm sort of a libertarian guy usually. And I'll usually sort of like to piss people off by being like, oh yeah, like the Republican guy, he's doing okay or what have you. Less and less so as the years go on, but Trump is just viscerally, yeah, I really dislike the man. So whoever the Dems nominate will have my vote. I will vote for absolutely anybody. I would vote for a dead goat that was for the Democratic Party against Donald Trump, a man I loathe with every fiber of my being.
All right, so what'd you guys think of the Yang Gang experience last night? Love it?
So Andrew Yang is very charming, and he has a great presence on stage, and he has an incredibly strong message. Whatever, there's a reason he has survived this race with a good, solid amount of support past a lot of people that others thought were going to be front runners, were going to have a shot at the nomination. Two things that I appreciated a lot about seeing him. One is, he talks about economic issues. Yes, he has a very 30,000 foot view case about automation and the changing economy and how that led to Trump. But when he actually gets to talking about economic issues and how it affects towns, he says things that you don't hear other people talking about. He says, has the mall by you closed? What do you do if you lose your job working retail and there's not a job to replace it? He speaks very specifically about problems and changes that people can see in their communities. And I think that that's really valuable. And whether or not he's the nominee, I hope we see other candidates talk that way too. The second piece of it was I thought there was a really emotional way that he talked about the, what does he call it? The freedom dividend? What does he call it? The $1,000 a month, the check. And it was talking about the ways in which we don't reward or value work like coaching Little League, volunteering in your community, being an activist, taking care of a elderly parent or a child with a disability, and that work currently in our society isn't valued and isn't paid for. But with this, you could receive an income for doing that kind of work. And I found that really moving and a part of the case for a universal basic income that I hadn't heard him make before. And so I just genuinely was moved by the emotional way he made that case.
Yeah, I think 5 minutes in, you get the appeal of Andrew Yang. He's funny, he's charming, he's personable, he talks like a human being. You could tell that people just liked him. I mean, I think he diagnoses a lot of the challenges we face economically. I think he loses me a little bit when he blames it entirely on automation, or when he literally says, like, when the robot truck armies will soon be upon us, like half joking, but not really. I also wonder if the UBI, this freedom dividend, is both not enough for people who they lost a job and are really struggling, and way too much money for us to afford because it's not means tested. So like those are some of the challenges, but you get why people like him. The event itself was big and rowdy. It was probably like half out of state people. That happens in Des Moines events. There's a lot of political tourists here right now, present company included. But like, I think no one's worked harder in the closing days than Andrew Yang in Iowa. He did a 17-day bus tour, 4 or 5 stops a day. His campaign success is a testament to the power of his message and him as an individual. I hope he has a bright future in the party. I hope the party finds a way to bring all of his voters into the party and welcome them with open arms and not make them feel excluded in any way, because there's a lot of energy there.
I was struck by the crowd. Like, even granted that, like, in every event we've seen, there were a lot of political tourists, but it was just it was a very different crowd than a typical Iowa crowd or any of the other Iowa crowds we've seen on this trip. Younger, the most diverse crowd by far, and a lot of people who, when Andrew Yang asked who they had caucused for, there were people who had caucused for Trump last time. There were people who had not caucused at all. And he's definitely struck something with people who were disenchanted with, quote unquote, politics as usual. And there's a lesson the rest of the Democrats can all learn from that if Andrew Yang does not end up being our nominee. And I think Thomas right, I hope we welcome the Yang gang with open arms into the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that was my thought too, is that I hope every Democratic candidate or whoever the eventual nominee is listens to an Andrew Yang stump speech. Because I hadn't really listened to I've seen him on the debate stage. I've heard clips before, but I hadn't listened to a whole speech. First of all, I thought he was very funny. It was one of the funniest speeches I've heard from any candidate this cycle.
Oh my God, yeah.
He's self-deprecating. He's charming. He speaks like a normal human being, all those things that we were just saying. I agree with Tommy that I think it's not just automation that's the source of all of our economic problems, though it is certainly a big part of it. I have some issues with universal basic income as well. I think there are other ways to sort of address those same challenges. But it struck me that his speech was speaking to something very big that's going on. And it's a speech that could reach people who don't pay attention to politics very closely. And it sort of speaks to this feeling of anxiety and malaise in the country that a lot of people feel, that like sort of, their kids aren't going to have the same future they did, and that things are getting out of control. And it's not just about Donald Trump or our politics, but it's something deeper than that. And I was sort of trying to listen to that for all of the candidate speeches, whether they hit on that. And he certainly did, more so than most of the people I heard from. It was a long event. Did go on for quite a while.
Yeah, I would. Look, it's a little late for this note, but I would say he gave an incredible 35-minute stump speech, but he spoke for about an hour.
My note to every campaign would be to ditch the majority of your pre-show. We don't need 2 videos. We don't need several warm-up speakers. It's true for Bernie. It's true for others. It gets redundant and it gets very long. It's a whiny little note, but it's like, I'm not sure what the value is to you for keeping people in a space for 2 hours instead of 1.
Yeah, look, it's a note we always used to get to Barack Obama too, so it's not.
And he didn't listen. So I'm sure there are many staffers telling him this.
I mean, do you remember in the last days before the 2008 caucus, I remember going to Hillary Clinton events and being like, she's speaking for an hour and 15 minutes.
So was Obama.
And then Obama was doing the exact same thing. You just there's something that must happen. There's something that happens if they want to hit everything, because they're getting all these questions. They want to make sure they touch every single thing that they've heard.
And they're tired, so they're kind of on autopilot, and just every word that they've ever said before comes out.
This is the part of the campaign where they're tired and they're like emotional. I think Andrew Yang broke down at an event recently talking about what it's meant for him to campaign in Iowa. His wife came forward in this really brave, moving way to talk about dealing with a sexual assault when she was pregnant. And it was clearly like she had been, the way that news had been treated and respected meant something to him. And he talked about that last night. So it's like, I'm really glad we went to the event.
Me too. All right, so the first event we went to when we got here was Friday afternoon. We went to a Pete Buttigieg event in Council Bluffs. So let's hear a little bit from that.
I just like his style. I like to listen to it, and he's got a good heart, and I like to hear it. So, yeah, makes you feel good.
Yes, I would agree. He brought up a lot of issues today that have been uppermost in our thoughts, and we just love his positivity and a fresh new face.
I love the fact that he is of a younger generation and can reach more people that way. And I think it's time that we do get someone with a more new attitude about how this country should be ran. And I think that he's perfect for it. I think that he talks about what he wants to get done and not what everybody else is doing wrong. I've loved him for a long time, but being able to actually talk to him and find out some of the issues that we've both had growing up with certain things like being gay, and there's a connection there with people that have these interests in these things that they want help with.
I've been for Pete when he first announced he was going to run. I thought this is what we need. We need energy. We need a new start, and definitely from what we've got now. And so this was amazing to watch him to speak and feel his enthusiasm.
Really, I've been a Pete supporter since I heard of him. I read his book, and ever since that, I'm just kind of hooked on him. I have seen him twice in town now. I saw him at Abraham Lincoln also a couple months ago. I have Avery, she's 3, and I have Eli. He will be 6 months next week, and I just thought it would be a good experience for them. He came with me to the first one, and she was with me today, and I wanted to come, so they kind of come everywhere with me.
I went to one of his town halls. As a boomer, I fell in love with him. His rules of the road are what my generation grew up with. Civility, decency, knowing how to agree to disagree. We called it being an adult. I relate Pete to Kennedy, the hope, the inspiration, the wanting to unite and move this country forward.
All right, so Dan, what do you think of Pete's message?
Pete's message is very familiar to us. He has been incredibly disciplined this entire campaign. It comes through in every answer on a debate stage. He's been omnipresent in the media for well over a year now, and so we've seen it. I think, and we'll talk about this as we talk about Warren and Sanders and Biden and everyone else, but everyone has come to an electability message at the end here trying to explain how they could win. And the thing I was struck by about Pete's message is he's reading the stage directions out loud, where he's basically saying, I'm the head and the heart candidate. You can love me, but I can also win.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned this to you guys, but I was talking to someone who was thinking about running for president. I was trying to explain to them that was the lane given this field, was to be the head and the heart candidate, the electable candidate who gives you passion. But never in my mind did I ever consider you would say those words out loud. You would just communicate it. But I would say, to Pete's credit and his great success, it may be that and he's very savvy about media in this era, that maybe in this era you can't get nuance through. And so you just have to tell people directly the thing. But other than that fact, it's the Pete message that took him from 0 to a top tier contender, and it has worked and he has stuck to it.
I will say, just on that note, we often talk about how voters have become pundits. And for voters who have become pundits, Pete is a very appealing candidate because he does speak right as they're sitting there calculating, okay, who is the best, most electable person? Who's the best person to win? What's the message to win? He sort of just spoon feeds them that message. And he did that in that event. He said, Vice President Biden says we need to go backwards. Bernie Sanders says we need to go all the way left or it doesn't count. I'm trying to tell you that we can, do both and look to the future. And so he sort of has an in-between vibe there.
Yeah, it was so explicit. It was so explicit. He's like, he might as well have gotten up there and said, I know you like Elizabeth Warren, but you don't think she can win. And I know you think Joe Biden can win, but you're not sure he's going to be the best kind of president. Here I am, Pete Buttigieg, the perfect person for everyone in Iowa who feels that way. All he needed to do was say their names. He said everything but their names, which I thought was interesting.
I think he said Biden and Sanders.
He said Biden and Bernie.
He said yes, but he said Biden in another place. He didn't explicitly link Biden to the you don't want him to be president, and he didn't explicitly link Warren to I don't think she can win. But that is clearly the subtext of what he's saying. We watching Pete, you see someone who's incredibly smart, who's thought very hard about the best path for him to win. I think about what he said to Axios, where he talked about how why he's in this race and the space he sees for himself in it. And then there's just this question, does he bring the kind of heart, pathos, gut energy and enthusiasm when he's up there? And it's all the pieces feel there, but there's a little bit of it feeling like somebody saying all these things without the like, I don't know, when you go see Bernie, you just see someone who is incredibly intense and engaged in what he's saying. And with Mayor Pete, it's almost there, but it's the words. It just feels like he's 90% pushing the words forward, I guess. That makes sense.
I thought the positioning of the message was probably the smartest of any candidate in this close, which is Biden is the same playbook. Bernie is a revolution. What I'm proposing is actually the most dramatic increase in healthcare in history. What I would be proposing is the greatest increase in access to affordable college education since the GI Bill. Like, these are huge, big things. Don't let them tell you that we need to go maximalist. And I think like that probably appeals to a lot of people. Intellectually, that appeals to me. I think you're right, Lovett, that like the question is whether the messenger and the message are all going to fit together in a way that people makes them decide to take the plunge. It was the event we went to. So Council Bluffs is 2 hours away from Des Moines. It's basically eastern Omaha. It was like 2 p.m. on a Friday. There were maybe 300 people there. Very conspicuously older crowd, lots of seniors. And that, again, could have been because it's a work day in the middle of the day, but not a bad size by any means. Some of the people we talked to, like, they clearly liked that he is not seen as divisive. There was a woman I was talking to who sort of viewed him as Kennedy-esque. I think he's run a very good Iowa campaign. I think he's got a good team. I just have no clue where he will land in this closing.
So he said this morning he did full round of Sunday interviews this morning, and he said obviously we need to do really well. His campaign's been saying like that they need to place at the top in Iowa. What do we think? Like, if Pete comes in, I guess what does Pete need to do to continue on after Iowa?
I think other than winning, right? So that's
right.
good. That's everyone
winning
wants
is
to
definitely good.
I think the second best place for Pete is to be ahead of Biden.
So do you think if Pete is, what if it ends up Bernie, Warren, Pete, Biden? You think Pete goes on?
I think they are. I don't want to fast forward on this conversation, but I think they're all going forward. I think none of the top four will be out of this race before South Carolina.
Yeah, that feels like a muddle forward scenario.
But like they have, ironically.
So you think even if Pete, what? I'm sorry, let me flip that then. What if it's Bernie, Warren, Biden, or Biden, Warren, and Pete's fourth?
If Pete is a distant fourth, I think he would still compete in New Hampshire. He was leading in New Hampshire polls like a month ago.
Yeah.
He has the money to do that. It's 7 days from now. And
right,
then
so why not?
Right. And if he comes, and that's the typical path. There's very few people who actually accumulate delegates here actually drop out after Iowa because
that makes sense.
Iowa and New Hampshire are so close. For all of them, the thing that is interesting is Bernie, Warren, Pete clearly have the ability to raise enough money to stay alive through South Carolina. Biden has not yet demonstrated the ability to raise that much money, but he is the only candidate who must stay through South Carolina because that is what he is designated as his firewall. So I think absent a very, very disappointing show for Pete, I think in particular, you're going to see all four most likely advance.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Elizabeth Warren, who we saw briefly on Friday night, where she greeted some volunteers at a bar in Des Moines right after she flew in from Washington.
I think 2020 is going to be a monumental election, and we have to get the candidate that's going to win, and I think that candidate is Elizabeth Warren. I really appreciate that she has a vision, a big picture, but also has the plans and the policy experience to get it done. She has shown, with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and everything, that she has the pieces to get it done and knows how to pull the levers and can take executive action first day in office, but also work with Congress and get measures passed that are going to be better for all Americans.
I think the progressive agenda is really important to me, that now is the time that we need to do something. It's a very historical point in history, I feel of just needing to not have politics as usual. We can't have the same things going on in terms of corruption was a big draw in her plan and her campaign, for me at least. And I think she has the tactics and the plans and the coalitions and general just good wholesome intentions to execute those and make them happen.
Senator Warren has a mix of a vision with really practical policy chops behind it. Both of us are attorneys, and so we actually look at the plans and look at sort of the substance behind what she's saying, and I think she really checks both of those boxes as a vision for change, but an actual implementation strategy to do that.
Yeah, the actual plans, having actual ideas behind how we're going to accomplish things. Other candidates, I feel like, have given us sort of fairy tales about what we can accomplish if we just vote for them, and that's not enough for me. I need to know what your plan is. I need to know how you're going to accomplish these things, and she's the only one I felt like who gave me really solid answers at this point in the race who's still left.
And I think that one thing I've heard from all the Democrats that I've talked to who are planning to caucus is whoever the candidate is, they're going to work their asses off to try to get them elected. So I think there's some unity in the party in that respect.
So Warren didn't really give much of a speech. She kind of just thanked everyone because she wanted to spend most of the time at the bar doing a selfie line. We're actually going to go to a Warren event today, so can actually hear the whole stump speech. But Tommy, you've spent probably the most time with her staff from your On the Ground in Iowa series. What are they thinking right now? What is sort of their what's their path on Monday here?
I think they've been deeply frustrated by the amount of time she's had to spend out of state for impeachment. And so she did this really quick event at a bar, very cleverly, I think, to just get some news footage of her in the state that could get on the local news the next morning and on the internet, just to show some momentum, showed that she's back. She's in Indianola right now, which is where we all saw Bernie the other day. Bernie had a couple hundred people. I'm told that there's 1,000 people at this Warren event now. She's going to do a big rally in Ames later this afternoon, which is north of Des Moines, and then Des Moines in the afternoon. I think her team, they don't know what's going to happen like anyone else, but they feel incredibly confident that they invested in the biggest, baddest organizing team earliest, and that there's more command and control over that organization than, say, Bernie's, which is more a strategy where you empower volunteers to do things on their own. So they're incredibly professional. They're organized. In some ways, they remind me of our campaign in 2008.
That's what I was going to ask you.
More than, doing this Iowa series, part of the reasons I loved it was getting to know all these FOs was great, but it also, these were our friends in 2008. So it felt like going back in time.
One of the things that someone on her campaign told me when we were at the bar is a group of voters that they're particularly counting on are people who did not participate in 2016, but voted in Iowa in 2018. And people who were, like a lot of you who are listening to this podcast, inspired to start getting involved in politics because of the election of Donald Trump and are new voters and have been organizing the last couple of years and participated in the 2018 midterms and a lot of these special elections around the country. And they think that group of voters in Iowa, if turnout's bigger, maybe they're not showing up as much in the polls, that those people could help put them over the top. So I thought that was interesting.
It is an interesting sort of math question for them, right? Which is there were 80,000 more people who caucused in 2008 than caucused in 2016. Who are those people? Who do they support? Are they people who were for Obama and then just felt less engaged 8 years later, who then have been reawakened by Trump? Like that, I think that 80,000, if we end up with a caucus turnout like 2008, which a lot of people are expecting, who makes up that gap between 08 and 16 will be is the key to is the most important question of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think they're also just betting on that there are people who will go into caucus night worried about her quote unquote electability. And if they see a big crowd of people in her corner, that will eliminate those concerns.
The other thing I've been struck by is this is all anecdotal Peggy Noonan yard sign bullshit, but everywhere we've gone, we have been, are you feeling struck by that?
No, I think you're going to make the same point as me.
Yeah. It's just, I have been struck by how many Warren and Pete out-of-state volunteers we have run into everywhere we go. And obviously you're out-of-state. And Bernie too. But for those three have been the most dominant. And now obviously your out-of-state volunteers cannot caucus for you, but it is a sign of both your general enthusiasm among your supporters and your organization that you can put together these out-of-state efforts. These people are coming in and knocking doors and making phone calls. And there's you see in the bars of Des Moines, real enthusiasm for those candidates.
I think with Warren though, they've had people in smaller towns building organizations very early on, so I think their strength is broadest. But APNYB never fails you.
What is that?
Anecdotal Peggy Noonan yard side bullshit.
The other. I was thinking about let me throw a pundit question at you guys, which is this. Obviously, if somebody comes in a distant fourth, that is very bad. There are bad outcomes that can happen to people. So with that caveat aside,
Again, this is top-notch analysis.
Here's my question. That was a caveat. That's not the analysis yet. All right, and it's not even analysis. It's a question. You're going to do the analysis. That's the beauty of a question. Here's my question. Because there's this sort of expectation around Bernie's surge, and because Elizabeth Warren had this surge like 2 months ago and it sort of dropped a little bit, is she poised better than anyone else to have a surprise that would be good for her? Is there anyone else better positioned that if they do well would gain more from it than Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah, I don't know about anyone. I think that
among the top four,
obviously.
Yeah, see, I sort of think it's any of the three that aren't Bernie. Like, I think if Joe Biden, after all these polls showing him sort of lagging and people thinking, and we're going to get to Joe Biden in a second, like, doesn't have the best organization, you don't see a lot of enthusiasm. If suddenly Joe Biden is like second or first in the caucus, I think Joe Biden gets a huge boost from that.
That's true.
I agree that Warren gets a huge boost as well. And Pete, by the way, like we were just talking about, if Pete comes in second place or Pete wins, or like that's any of those people.
Any winner is going to get it.
Huge.
Any winner other than Bernie is going to get a gigantic boost. Huge. Bernie will also get a boost, but it's it is the, like, in the 538 out, like their model, the bigger the surprise of the victory, the bigger the bounce.
Yeah, we should just pause on this, which is to say, you don't necessarily have to win Iowa to be seen as a winner coming out of Iowa because of the expectations game, where if you surprise people with your finish, or you're seen as doing well among a constituency that's important, that can let you spin out a narrative that helps you going forward.
The thing to watch out for is whoever comes in fourth spinning the three-way tie for second.
I guess the reason I say that is only because it feels like a lot of her challenges have been around this sort of a slight downtick in her polling after the kind of healthcare sort of issue sort of plagued her for a few weeks, plus the electability question that's plagued her for a while, so that overperforming for her sends such an important signal.
I think overperforming for her could bring back, like, she's the only candidate who has had voters and then lost them, right? And so there are these people who left her to go to Bernie or left her to go to Pete or someone else, and if she were to exceed expectations and become the story coming out of this, you could get some of those people back. The hard part is that the State of the Union is Tuesday and the impeachment trial ends on Wednesday, so the winner of the Iowa caucus, or the proverbial winner of the Iowa caucus, will get less attention on the two most important days for that person than would otherwise happen.
Shame on you for racing the John Delaney supporter who left him, came back, and finally left him.
All right, let's talk about Joe Biden. Michael and Elijah went to his event in Cedar Rapids on Saturday. We're going to see him here in Des Moines later today on Sunday. Let's listen to some of the folks that Michael and Elijah talked to.
One of our main things is just please replace our current president, and we just felt he was the best to do it. Also, his foreign policy experience in the Senate. We felt just really confident about that. And climate.
His foreign policy experience and gravitas. I think we're seeing a lot of things in foreign policy that are unraveling unnecessarily. And I feel like we've got a lot of work to do to get our credibility back.
I mean, it don't take no rocket scientist to figure out he's the most qualified. I mean, if that means anything anymore.
And so you plan on getting behind the nominee no matter who that person is?
For sure, yes. So we're just hoping we've got the strongest candidate.
I would not be nervous with Warren, and I like her a lot, and I like what she has to say. But I'm not sure the country's ready for it. I wouldn't be nervous with her. I would be nervous with Bernie. No, I'm not nervous about the general election. I think we've got a very good chance of beating Donald Trump.
Do you plan to support whoever the nominee is and to volunteer and to be out there doing things for that person?
Absolutely. Yes, I do.
Well, for one thing, we can't go on like we're going on now. That's quite evident. And I went to door campaigning, and it was pretty much a general consensus that whoever got the nomination, we're going to back 100%. So that's quite clear.
Okay, so Biden for me is sort of the big question mark, maybe of all these candidates, because we, like I said earlier, anyone you talk to here in Iowa, they say they probably have the weakest organization of the top 4 candidates. You don't see a ton of enthusiasm, and yet, he could be the candidate that a lot of people decide to come home to in the end. A lot of undecided people might say, "Oh, I think Joe Biden's the most electable." I'll give my little anecdote. When I was flying here, I was sitting next to an Iowan on the plane, and he said, "I've been undecided this entire time. I really like all the top 4 or 5 candidates. I could go with any of them. I'll vote for any of them as the nominee. It's fine. It's great." He's like, "But when Joni Ernst came out of the Senate impeachment trial and said, 'Well, now we just heard about Joe and Hunter Biden. It'll be interesting what Iowans do about this,' when she gave that bullshit fucking talk, he was like, that made me decide I'm going to actually caucus for Joe Biden."
I heard that from an Iowa State senator that I ran into last night, who said that at her very progressive church, there were a lot of people saying that Joni Ernst really pissed them off and sent them to Biden.
Yeah. And when I first heard people opine that might happen, I sort of rolled my eyes like, is that really going to push people towards him? But this guy was like, yeah, it really pissed me off, and it made me think they're scared of Joe Biden.
I mean, look, if Joe Biden was running a really nimble campaign, the fact that Donald Trump is being impeached because he was so scared of running against Joe Biden would be a pretty great issue for you, right? If you were really being nimble and able to make that the focus of your electability message. We'll see if they've achieved that. I've always wondered if late-breaking caucus goers will decide that they're going to default to what they believe electability means, and that it's the former vice president of the United States over other candidates. We shall see.
Yeah.
I mean, there has been sort of this running debate in political circles between a lot of people who think the Biden campaign has been underperforming, right? Just in the basic nuts and bolts of politics. Do you have enough precinct captains? Are you doing a good job fundraising? Are you leveraging your media opportunities in the right way? And the Biden campaign, who has been very confident in how they've been doing, and saying that a lot of the people who are overly obsessed with Twitter and overly engaged are not focused on the real things that matter. And I think we're going to get the answer to that question on Tuesday night. Or, sorry, we're going to get the answer to that question on Monday night.
I'll just
Disinformation.
I would just say, there's Joe Biden the brand, there's Joe Biden the candidate, there's Joe Biden the campaign. Joe Biden's success or failure, it seems to me that where Joe Biden in the polls is right now as a front runner or near front runner, depending how you look at it, has been about Joe Biden the brand, not Joe Biden the candidate, and not necessarily Joe Biden the campaign. Whether that is enough to overcome the incredible organization and more enthusiastic volunteers of other campaigns, we just don't know. Nobody knows. Before we knew that the Des Moines Register poll had been shredded like late night Enron CPAs. We were talking amongst ourselves about it, and the question we had as we were kind of trying to guess the numbers was the Biden number was the hardest one to predict because we just honestly don't know.
I would add one more factor to the mention before, it is Joe Biden the person. And what is, just put aside whatever you think about his debate performances or the state of his stump speech, is Democrats love Joe Biden. They know Joe Biden. They think he is, without a doubt, and they are correct, a truly decent human being. And when you're making a decision in these moments, that is going to be, whether it's at a caucus site in Iowa or in the voting booth down the line, that's going to help him a lot, because when people are choosing between people they like Joe Biden is in that conversation and they know him well.
Yeah. I think the challenge for Biden is if we have sort of a muddled finish where there's a bunch of people clumped together and no clear winner, if he can't raise money quickly and online without doing events and coming off the trail, that's going to be very hard. And he's been burning through money fast.
Yeah, he has $9 million in the bank and no demonstrated ability to raise money quickly. And you can't really afford to leave the trail now that the voting starts, because you got 7 days in New Hampshire. You got another 10 days till Nevada, and then 10 days till South Carolina, and you can't do a 5-day swing in California to raise money.
And Bernie just rings that online cash register.
And just one more uncertainty to all of it, in all of this is, let's say Joe Biden does underperform in the Iowa caucus. What does that mean for the strong polling he's showing in other states? Will that change, or will it remain the same? And just, I don't think anybody can confidently say what will happen.
Yeah, and specifically in the African American vote, because as long as he maintains that commanding lead among that community, he is at least the co-front runner to be the nominee, because that is the path to accumulating pledged delegates, is through primarily African American congressional districts where you can net serious numbers of delegates, where people are splitting them in more diverse districts around the country.
All right, let's talk about the front runner in Iowa right now, Bernie Sanders. We went to his event in Indianola on Saturday. Let's hear from some folks we talked to there.
Well, I was really drawn to his consistency at the end. I was actually pretty torn between a handful of the candidates up until fairly recently, and that's really what it came down to, because a lot of the policies that a lot of the people have been introducing are fairly similar. I just feel like Bernie is more trustworthy because he's been saying the same stuff for years and years and years.
Out of the candidates who have vowed to support the Green New Deal, he is the one who is most willing to go through with it. Like even Elizabeth Warren, who has supported parts of it, is not great on other issues. And I think that he's going to do what it's going to take to get the Green New Deal passed as a resolution and try to fulfill it.
Bernie has, without fail, been unwaveringly supportive of, solving issues that face young people particularly. I don't have health insurance. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay off my student loans. So, I feel like he understands issues facing us and he's willing to address them. Effectively, I just decided, I can either hope that, we can achieve all of these radical things that Bernie thinks that we can, or I can kind of, be defeatist and go for a more moderate candidate, and I chose to hope, and it's working out really well. So that's what's up.
To me, Bernie's kind of consistency, especially on Medicare for All, kind of his authenticity with working class voters, it really resonates with me, my background. And I think the energy that we're seeing from his campaign, all the people here, all the new people that he's bringing in, that's what we need as Democrats. For too long we've been going after this small segment of the electorate, swing voters, and we need to expand, in my opinion. I'm pretty cautiously optimistic that everybody's going to work to get rid of Trump. It's just something that is different, with the electorate, with Democrats. So I think all the campaigns have to be cautious that if somebody drops out, not to kind of spike the football or celebrate that. It's about, people are kind of picking their candidate with their heart a little bit. So I think you have to be cautious of that.
So, my thought listening to Bernie's whole stump speech, which is the first time I heard his speech in its entirety, is it was a speech that was not just for his supporters, but for most Democrats in the party. Whatever you think of Bernie Sanders, if you just heard that speech in isolation, he talks about why electability is important, why beating Trump is important, why Trump is the most dangerous president of our time. He goes through a list of issues. He talks in big value statements about those issues. Nothing seems too radical or too left. It actually seemed like a speech that a mainstream Democrat could like, which made me think Bernie is thinking about maybe past Iowa and what it would be like to try to win the Democratic nomination.
I thought it was very notable that very early in the speech, he made it 100% clear that he would get behind, if he was not the nominee, which he hoped he would be, he would get behind whoever that person was, which if you're on Twitter, you understand the surrogate war context for that. But he's addressing a concern that some number of Democrats has. He does it very early, and it was very smart, I thought.
It was also explicit. It was just such an explicit call to unity. And it's what you say when you think you're going to win.
Yeah.
The other to John's point, he also talked about Medicare for All, and he said it in a way that I maybe he says it this way on the stump. He hasn't said it in this way exactly in the debate. He said we are going to improve and expand Medicaid. We're going to improve and expand Medicare to all. And I found it to be just a subtle distinction in how he talks about Medicare for All. But, Medicare for All as a phrase is, we're all well versed in it. We've heard it a million times. But if you're just listening to somebody talk about this as an issue, not as a shibboleth, not as an indicator of where a person is in the ideological wars online, he was describing it in the most practical, moderate sounding way you can describe single payer healthcare.
I also think we sometimes forget that Bernie has been able to prepare for this day since 2016, and that's a real head start. I mean, there's a lot of really good, well-run campaigns and great staffers out there on other campaigns, but in some way, I felt like the last several weeks I've spent with the Bernie people, they seem the most confident. They seem like they've been thinking through things for a long time, doing things in non-traditional ways when it comes to the media. They're kind of the most ready for prime time right now. Like the number of surrogates they've had in the state this past couple of weeks that are high wattage. You know, they had 7,000 people watching Vampire Weekend and Bernie last night. They had AOC last week. And like, you know, surrogate events don't mean that all those people are going to caucus for you, but the Bernie folks told me that of the 800 or so people that went to her AOC's Iowa City event, they got 300 additional volunteer shifts out of those people. So that adds up over time. And they're also telling press about a specific focus on Latino voters, because 3,000 Latino voters in Iowa caucused, but there's 50,000 registered Latino voters. And if you can close that gap, that's a huge number of new people. And Bernie actually does well with Latino voters. So they have a strategy. They've been thinking about it. We'll see if they can execute. We'll see if I'm just being spun. Very possible, but it's been impressive to see them.
Not Tommy. Not Tommy Vitor.
I do want to say one last thing before we go about how the results are judged on Monday night. If you've listened to Tommy's series, you know that the Iowa Democratic Party will, for the first time, it's basically going to be 4 different results: the results of the first alignment, the results of the final alignment, which is when anyone who doesn't meet that 15% threshold sort of realigns to their second choice candidate. They will release the state delegate equivalents and then the number of pledged delegates to the conventions. So obviously there could be different winners among all those different categories. What do you guys think? What should matter the most as we are judging the strength of these different campaigns heading out of Iowa?
Delegates should matter because that's how you get the nomination. I think the raw number, who has the most votes, will probably be the one that gets the most attention. Because even though delegates do matter, Iowa represents a tiny percentage of the overall delegates you need to reach the majority of pledged delegates. So it's really it's a drop in the bucket relatively. So the person who gets the most votes will be seen, I think, by a lot of press as the person who wins Iowa. It's also likely it's the same person who succeeds in all of those.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, the winner of the nomination is the person who gets the most delegates, period, right? And so the Iowa Democratic Party and Troy Price and his team have done a great job preparing for this day, have been really trying to focus reporters' attention on state delegate equivalents and the ultimate pledged delegates that will come out of Iowa. That said, if there's a split result, let's say Andrew Yang gets the most raw vote total and Bernie wins the delegates, of course the Yang campaign would spin that they had the most votes. And who is going to hear that spin and say, no, this state delegate equivalent thing, which me, Tommy Vitor, having worked in Iowa for over a decade, still can't understand or explain to you, is more important, right? So, like, it could be kind of a muddled mess. Now, if someone runs away with it, it won't be a problem. But look, credit to the IDP, credit to the Iowa Democratic Party for trying to release more data and be more transparent. But it does leave more avenues for spin. You can also see the Pete campaign trying to focus people on counties in Iowa that went from Obama to Trump and make that an electability narrative, which is clever. But we'll see if that works.
Expectations, I think, is going to determine what happens, right?
Yeah.
Like, if someone else wins the raw vote total and Sanders wins delegates, that other person is probably going to get a bigger boost, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. Like, the campaigns will be able to spin different results as good for them, and they should, right? I do think as we leave Iowa, it's good for everyone who's sort of been paying attention to a primary for the first time to remember that it is a race for delegates, because we went through this back in 2008 too, where, you know, sometimes the Clinton campaign would say, oh, we won bigger states with more populations, you know, and then we'd say
we had to say something.
No, which is true, you know.
But what happens is we have to say something,
you know, and it's fine to spin however you want to spin, but we'll say this a million times between now and the convention. It is a race for delegates. The person with the most delegates wins the nomination. And obviously, if you get a majority of pledged delegates, you clinch the nomination. But we also could end up with a situation where you get to the convention and someone has a plurality of delegates, right? But
that's highly likely.
That's highly likely with this
candidate race.
Yes, with this many candidates, and it would be at least in my opinion, pretty fucking crazy to have the person who won the plurality of delegates, who has the most delegates, to not have that person, that candidate, win the nomination. And so the way that delegates are allocated is different in each state, and it's weird, and it's not like the Republicans in a lot of states where it's just winner take all. So just keep an eye on the candidate delegate totals as we go from state to state, because those are most important.
This is sort of the advantage of having Iowa first, because it is the only state where you get delegate answers at the same time. In every other state, which just runs a primary, the AP or whoever just calls it and it says, Clinton wins X state. And it takes a long time to get the congressional district by district data to determine delegate allocation. We had this problem for us in Nevada.
Famously in Nevada.
In 2008, where they called the state for Clinton. She had, even though it was a caucus, she had the most raw vote. And then when a few hours later, we did the math, and it turned out that we had won this congressional district up in the northern part of the state, and we actually netted more delegates in there. But it was impossible to. It was very hard to spin the reporters on that.
That's what's important, is because if that happens, and it might not happen in Iowa, it might happen in Nevada, it might happen in some other state. Someone winning the popular vote, but another candidate winning one more delegate than that, doesn't mean it was rigged or unfair or anything like that. Like that's the way this is, and everyone signed up for this ahead of time, knowing the rules.
Yeah, this is not rigged. These are the rules, and I do think that's an important distinction.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we will. So we will record one more. A bonus pod on Tuesday morning, right after we know the results of Iowa, and we'll talk to you then.
Listen to this episode pretty quick, because it turns into a pumpkin.
And listen to my Iowa series. What's wrong with you? Hurry up.
Listen to Tommy's Iowa series,
please.